we left off in the last slides with the introduction of the happy slave. Now, the happy slave was equal parts propaganda for the southern states and for the U.S. and uh, revolt on behalf of the slaves. If you think about the happy slave, you see this image a lot. If you were to Google happy slave, there'd be many images of slaves being, laughing and dancing and carrying on. And part of this was really a propaganda on behalf of the slave owners, on behalf of the southern states, to convince first the North that slavery wasn't so bad. Also in Europe, slavery had been abolished many decades prior to the 1860s when we finally abolished slavery. And so the foreign nations looked down upon the U.S. for continuing to practice slavery within our borders. And so we needed a propaganda machine that would say, look, it's not so bad. In fact, slaves wouldn't last on the outside. Slaves were raised on plantations, and so they wouldn't even know what to do if they had the freedom to seek for themselves life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. We know, of course, that was a lie. But this whole idea of a slave that is happy, a slave that is of low intelligence, this whole idea that slaves are lazy, you heard that a lot. We read that a lot in some of the journals of the mistresses and the masters, saying that the slaves are of low intelligence because they break the tools, that they are lazy because they won't work unless you make them. Well, consider that the slave was using laziness, was using clumsiness as a form of revolt, as a form of mental revolt. If you break the tool, if you cripple the animal, it was a method of minimizing the profit of the master. If you break a tool, you can't use it. If you pretend to be lazy and unable to work because you are so of low intelligence, then you're revolting against your master's ability to utilize your talents, to utilize your body, to utilize your industriousness. So not working was a form of revolt. Also, if you think about the type of treatment and the type of work that a happy slave would get, often benefited the slave himself. So if a slave proved himself to be kind and generous and mild-mannered and mild-tempered, he or she would more than likely get a job indoors or get a job that would keep him out of the hot sun for 12 hours a day. A slave pretending to be ignorant or faithful or appreciative of being a slave, as we saw in the revolts around Nat Turner, and we saw in the revolts of other slave revolts. It was the happy slave, it was the house slave that had the ability to go in and kill his master, that had the ability to go in and set fire to the house, had the ability to know the ins and outs of a house, to be able to go in and maybe take money from the master. Or you could just imagine how easy it would be much easier to gain the trust of the master if you acted docile, ignorant, faithful, and just happy to be a slave. And so I bring all of this up to show that there were forms of mental revolt going on in the plantations. Here's some dialogue between a mistress and a free slave. And I bring this this final slide in to show that the culture was so ingrained in southern white America that this was the way it should be. And a noble Christian, fair-minded white Southerner was happy, content, and felt perfectly content with themselves if they were just kind to their slaves. A mistress's journal, and I believe this is in your Takaki book, it reads, "You know that we reared you as our own children, that you was never abused, and that shortly before you ran away, when your master asked you if you would like to be sold, you said you would not leave him to go with anybody." This is the words of a mistress who was writing and chastising her slave for running away. To what the free slave, now free slave, responds, "Woman, did you raise your own children for the market? Did you raise them for the whipping post?" The ex-slave boldly proclaimed his love for his liberty. "Wretched woman, be it known to you that I value my freedom, more indeed than my own life, more than all the lives of all the slaveholders and tyrants under heaven."